Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. I'm jumping right into the show because you've been talking all week. Senator Scott Sifton, the late-night negotiator extraordinaire. I think the state owes you a tip of the hat for avoiding a PQ. Tell me about the negotiations on the tort reform bill and what's in it.
Well, it was a late night in the Senate and an early morning, Tuesday and Wednesday, working on the venue and joinder bill. One of the unique circumstances was the fact that we had a Supreme Court decision less than 2 weeks before that had sort of completely recast the entire paradigm.
But you thought it would make it easier to pass the bill.
In a way, it sort of did. I mean, part of it is everybody in the process knew we had to find a way to get to something on this for 100 different reasons. And so we worked very hard all night long across the aisle. The floor leader, the sponsor, and one of the other attorney members of the majority caucus, and I sat at the table, and a lot of shuttle diplomacy, and just rolled up our sleeves and got it done.
So how is a Missouri, I mean, obviously it's going to be a little harder to sue companies, sue insurance companies. How does this actually affect them? And is there part of this bill that maybe reins in some practices that even as an attorney, it's a little hard to defend?
Well, we want to make sure that when people have disputes, they are resolved efficiently, and that we don't have more lawsuits in the world than we already have, or certainly than we need. The goal is to make the administration of justice as efficient as possible. Reasonable minds can disagree about how you do it. My concern was to make sure that for folks that believe they have been harmed by some of the products that are out there in the world, and a lot of these folks are cancer patients, want to make sure that they get their day in court and that they get a fair hearing. So
while I was sitting in the gallery watching, you'd come in periodically, but everybody knew you were negotiating this bill. You had some senators, Senator Brian Williams, Lauren Arthur, Carla May, the first time on the floor, holding the floor while you were negotiating. They did pretty well. 14 hours?
They did great. It was on both sides of the aisle. And frankly, we had members of the majority party helping to keep the ball in the air as well, especially later on in the debate.
Mike Searpoint and Bill White carried the ball the last couple hours. I thought that was interesting.
And it shows that when people are letting the process work, that bipartisan cooperation is and can be a thing in Jefferson City. Not what you see every day, but in moments like that, I think sometimes our better instincts really do come through. But it was great to see that the freshman Democrats in particular. I think it was a good experience for a lot of the new members of the Senate on both sides of the aisle to see how the process can work.
So tell me about what else. This is obviously an issue close to you. What else are you looking for this session, keeping an eye on?
I would still like to get a better school transfer law on the books while I remain in the Senate. We had some difficult experiences a few years back, with the Normandy School District almost going bankrupt because of the transfer law that we have, and we had some logistical challenges in other places. I'd still like to get that done. And I'm also still working to get some pro-law enforcement measures passed, cracking down on heroin and fentanyl. We live in an age where DNA evidence can do a lot of things to help us solve crimes. Sure. But we're not doing all we can, and I'd like to get some of those ideas across the finish line too.
All right, now let me ask you the real question people want to know. Now that you have this tort reform, the first one of these bills negotiated, the Democrats need a leader in the state party. Few tough election cycles. Many people are talking about you as somebody that could be the standard bearer for Missouri Democrats running for governor in 2020. Where are you at in the process on deciding if you're going to answer that call?
Well, focused on the legislative session while we've got that in front of us, but very much making plans and laying the foundation to move forward with the governor's race.
If you're a Democrat, though, really, if you look at general elections, you're the only person that's won a swing district in a general election in the last several cycles. You raise money. You're a Democrat that has been able to relate to cops and have their support. I think that's something that might transcend outside normal Democrat issues that people are thinking about right now. You've won swing districts in tough general election years. You're somebody that people would talk about. What does the process for you look like in making a decision?
Well, look, it's very clear that what Democrats have been doing in Missouri has not been working. We need a fresh approach, and there are some others that I think have found some success in some of these races. But I think part of the challenge for Democrats is they talk as if winning elections is what really matters. And to be sure, elections are very important, but we need to bring the focus back to what we're going to do for people. We've got to articulate a clear vision of how we move forward in a state that has a lot of wonderful opportunities in front of it, but also some challenges in the near future. And look, a lot of what needs to be done is just good old-fashioned careful managing of taxpayer dollars. We're going to have, I think, some real budgetary constraints in the coming years, but we've got to find a way amidst that to keep higher and post-secondary education affordable for families and for young people as they enter the workforce. And we've got to find a way to get Medicaid right, and I believe that part of that includes Medicaid expansion.
Is that the way forward? I mean, if you're a Democrat watching this show, and you've put up signs, you've canvassed, went door to door, and you're maybe in eastern Jackson County, and you're a little frustrated about the losses, what message do you give to them? How do you turn things around?
We need to talk about how to move the state forward, and we've got to articulate a better, more realistic vision for what the future needs to look like in our state than our friends across the aisle.
Governor Nixon, he knew a thing or two about getting votes. No Missourians ever got as many votes as Governor Nixon. And I always, when he talked to him, he talks about the value of work, putting the value back on Democrat Party and the value of your work and labor. And I think that is something that might connect on a level that maybe Democrats haven't connected recently.
And I think one of the biggest issues is better paying jobs for working families. And how do you get there? And we have, again, a lot of opportunities in that regard, but also some challenges just presented by the current economic state of affairs, which is great in many ways, but also presents some real challenges.
So when you look at obviously we used to be a state that would kind of buck national trends, and I'm not sure that's the case as much anymore, the way we've evolved, but now you have presidential contenders. It's really in the process. This isn't too early. Some folks have talked and announced and things. Is there a contender to you think, whether you're supporting them or not, would do well in Missouri?
You know, I'm a Midwesterner, so I'm interested in Midwestern candidates. I have my eye on Amy Klobuchar. I also am hopeful that Kamala Harris can inspire people in a way that maybe not every candidate in the field can. I know a lot of Missourians are waiting to see what Joe Biden does as well, so it'll be interesting to see. And the Iowa caucuses are less than a year away at this point, and a lot's going to be going on not too far from here.
I'm just a simple hillbilly. But I think when you look at Donald Trump's appeal, which I realize not every media source believes that's real, but I think it's a very real appeal he has in this state, especially in places that used to vote Democrats, where he probably overperforms the most. I think Joe Biden would be the person who have the gravitas to, instead of being angry at Trump, kind of brush him aside. I think there's a style Joe Biden has that he can deliver a punch and you don't think he's a bad guy that might play well in the Midwest.
I agree with that. I think there's something to be said for Amy Klobuchar's pragmatism as well.
Sure.
In the case of Biden, I think the thing that if he runs, he needs to make sure he does is talk about what the next 4 to 8 years are going to look like, and not what we were doing a decade ago in a completely different set of circumstances. I mean, he has to talk about how we move forward and not just talk about where we came from during his tenure as vice president.
It would lead me to think that Missouri Democrats probably haven't done their job if you're not on a statewide ballot in 2020 somewhere. Would one of those presidential contenders showing well early influence that decision for you?
I plan to be part of moving our state forward regardless of what happens in the presidential nominating process. We're coming up on a time, and in part because of shifting demographics in the economy, where we're going to need some really strong management in state government, and I'm determined to be part of moving our state forward.
Well, Senator Sifton, the taxpayers got their dollars worth on your hour to hour this week. We thank you for adding a little bit to that schedule and joining us on This Week in Missouri Politics.
Always a pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
We'll be right back with our opinion maker panel. Lou Hamilton, Mr. Mardi Gras, joins us after this. But go to showmissouri.com, the history of Mary's County. We spent some time in Vienna this week. I think you'll enjoy learning about the history of one of the great rural Missouri counties in the state. Be right back.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople, while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
At Ameren, Missouri, we know what light can do. It draws people together and chases monsters away. And if you shine it in the right direction, it will light the path for the next generation, showing them what their tomorrow could look like and spotlighting the possibilities that lay in front of them. Investing in our community by lighting the way forward. That's energy at work. Ameren, Missouri.
Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics Opinion Maker Panel Time. We have Mr. Mardi Gras, the John Barget of St. Louis, Lou Hamilton. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you, Scott.
Jake Hummel, the AFL-CIO. You keep Mike Lewis busy.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us again. Richard McIntosh, governmental consultant extraordinaire. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And Mary Elizabeth Coleman, legislator, Jefferson County. We'll start with you.
Great.
The biggest abortion bill I've ever seen put together passed the House this week. You were one of the main architects of it. Explain to people the cliff notes of what's in it.
You bet. So we have the most pro-life speaker in the country, Elijah Har, had a wonderful line in his introductory speech to the body, and he has really backed that up. So the bill does kind of, instead of all of this piecemeal, it says, you know what, we're going to take a big shot, we're going to do a moonshot, we're going to do everything we can to protect every child in the state. So bans abortions when there's heartbeats and brain waves. At 8 weeks, if for some reason that's overturned, there's a 14-week ban based on the undue burden meant to withstand legal challenge. If that gets overturned, there's an 18-week. If that gets overturned, there's a 20-week. There's added provisions to make sure that both parents are on board if there's ever a child who's a minor who's wanting to obtain an abortion, increases medical malpractice, protects, we have children surviving abortions, make sure that there's money there in case they're harmed during that process. Shamed Dogan had a big amendment on to protect people with adverse diagnoses, specifically Down syndrome, and then also based on sex and race. So
I've heard a big, many times you talked about the heartbeat bills.
Yeah.
This one, you said, and brainwaves. What all does that actually mean?
That's right. So the statute of death and saying that you are legally dead has a two-part test. It says if you have a heartbeat, or if not, then there's a chance to look at brain function. And so we're tying the recognition of protection of life to that death statute to bring consistency within the laws. So we're really confident that this is a strong bill and that it will stand up to judicial challenges.
Jake Hummel, you've been in the Senate. You've watched these things come through the House and debated them. You've seen them hit the Senate. I would say this could be met with a lengthy discussion on the merits of this bill.
I think you're probably right. It's you know, this is this is going to be a really, really big challenge to get through the Senate. But as you know, when it comes to some ideological things, there's certain things that rise to the level of PQ in the Republican Party, and that could very well be one of them.
You would have to PQ this bill to pass it, right?
I think there's no way that, with no exception for rape or incest, which I find particularly horrible, I think that there's no chance that passes without a PQ.
Richard McIntosh, you've watched this abortion politics play out many, many times. I think sometimes it looks a little academic because at the end of the day, you could see, I think there's an expectation some of these very broad bills do not withstand a court challenge. A bill this broad, do you think it really can be implemented in the state of Missouri?
I think they will try and implement to the best degree that they can. I think they've really kind of stair-stepped in anticipation, and I think they've tried to write some future-proof legislation that might come into play. So that makes some economic sense in terms of the legislative process. So you take what you can take, and the courts will rule out what they want to rule out.
And I noticed you talked about how you changed the weeks to, you know, in anticipation that a court could strike down parts of this. I mean, if this bill is PQ'd, and I assume this governor will sign it, this is a federal court case on day one, and I guess the law was written in preparation of that.
Well, it was made really to protect as many children and families in the state as it could. We are certainly looking towards the future as the judicial branch is writing laws in this area. There's also a total ban in case Roe gets overturned. So we're trying to be as conservative as possible to make sure that there's protections in place.
Well, when you've watched these debates go back and forth, looks to me like if you're watching this in the city of St. Louis, this is the worst thing you've ever seen. If you're on the other side of the Merrimack in Jefferson County, this is maybe one of the reasons why Republicans have made gains in places like Jeff County.
Yeah, I think, you know, for me the issue is if you're going to take the draconian step of being as thorough and trying to ban abortions as this bill does, you ought to also spend an equal amount of time doing prevention. And instead, we're cutting Planned Parenthood when the records show clearly that prevention and preventive education avoids, in most cases, a woman's need to get an abortion. Secondly, I would apply the same litmus test of brainwaves to the legislature as I would to this, and I'll leave it at that.
Well played. I'm going to ask you one other question. Lou, you've observed this for a very long time, and I think you probably saw Democrats lose races in a nice way.
Okay.
However, what if the dog ever caught the car and Roe versus Wade was overturned? I'm not sure that would be as popular as some Republicans think it would be.
I think you're correct on that. I think, you know, it will become more of a personal issue than a political issue at that point, and I think there'll be a lot of switched opinions. And I grew up Irish Catholic. My mother was a real liberal Democrat and a relentless pro-lifer. Yeah. You know, and her attitude was do everything you can to keep it from happening, and then mind your own business.
Legal and rare was what Bill Clinton said.
Well, and I think also that wanting to make sure not only is it illegal, but it's unthinkable, and making sure that we've got the resources for women. I'll push back a little bit on the Planned Parenthood comment, though, because we have more pregnancy resource centers in the state than any other state in the country, 105. So
what would a pregnancy resource center be? Like is there one in your district?
Yeah,
and what
we've
would
got
the
a
name
couple
of it
of them.
be? Is it called Pregnancy Resource Center?
No, so you've got Birthright, you've got, I see I'm blanking, there's a brainwave problem here happening. But so there's just a large number of them. They work for everything from through pregnancy, but after the birth of the child.
So they would do the same things Planned Parenthood does in many respects, except they don't perform abortions.
That's right. They do ultrasounds, they do medical care, and then paid for with physicians, obviously, and then also diaper banks after lying.
They have a history of providing factually inaccurate information to women. They don't give them all of their full facts and options, and I find that to be problematic. Aside from the good work that they probably do, you know, we talk about what Planned Parenthood does, but abortions are like one of the smallest amounts of. If the 100% of what they do, that's like 5%. You know, all of the cancer screenings.
Do you think maybe that Planned Parenthood, these are the same attacks on them, they provide false information?
Absolutely. This goes both ways. This goes both ways. But let me tell you something else. This is a jobs bill for attorneys. The fact the legislature is passing this, knowing that on day one it's going to court, I mean, how much money and state resources are we going to spend defending this law that we know is going straight to the courts?
Well, Richard Magnus, let's talk. You mentioned attorneys. The Senate went till 6:30 in the morning, and that's starting at 2, going all the way through, seeing three different 2 o'clocks on tort reform. It was meant to make it harder to move cases around the state, enjoying class actions. I thought, you know, anytime it could end in a compromise without a PQ, it seems like senators are doing the work they should do.
I agree. And you know, we have these cycles every 2 or 3 years. We pass a tort reform bill. The courts run through them. They change the law. We have another tort reform bill. It is just like clockwork. And it's been exactly like that.
Now, there was a Supreme Court decision, though, that I thought would make this bill easier to pass, that basically ended a lot of the joinder and things. However, it didn't, you know, the bill wasn't easier to pass, clearly.
What I've discovered at the end of the day, if a judge sees that someone has really been wronged, they're going to try and find a way to make them whole. And if that means it blows up the law, then that just means the legislature's got to come back and do it again.
Jake, take us to the back cloakroom when these deals are getting done, these lengthy, you know, 14, 16-hour debates. How does something not seem reasonable at 10 p.m. but seems more reasonable at 4 a.m.?
Sheer exhaustion. You know, I mean, there's a lot to that. You know, you run everybody as long as you can, and at some point, either cooler heads prevail or, you know, one side gives in. And I'll say this, you know, this is a key issue for the Republican legislature. They made it an issue, one of the first bills of substance that the Senate has really gone after. Most of this bill just fell in line with the Supreme Court ruling. Yeah. There really wasn't much that was gotten on the other side.
Senator Sifton for that.
And that's right. I think Senator Sifton led those negotiations. Senator Rizzo was certainly involved. He did a great job. You know, so much of this was right around the edges in terms of what the bill actually did. But at the end of the day, we basically just, aside from a few minor details, we just reaffirmed what the Supreme Court just said.
Well, this is an interesting bill. It's huge. It's very impactful. It's very complicated. You're an attorney yourself. If this were to come back to the House, do you change this? Do you pass the Senate version? What happens with this?
Listen, I don't want to speak for leadership, but I ran into Scott Sifton in the hallway the day after, fairly late in the afternoon. He looked refreshed. He looked energized. He was excited. He was talking positively about Floor Leader Rowden. They've just negotiated a deal and gotten it over, and that's their right to do so, and we're going to take our own look at it and see what we think is the right thing to do.
Give me a prediction. The House changes this bill.
Absolutely.
I don't, yeah. So to me, you PQ one bill a year that's a caucus priority, there you go. Abortion or torts, what do they pick?
You know, I think that you may have a different, you've got the Senate conservative caucus out there. You know, they might not be happy with just one. This may be an issue where it goes to the, well, this may be an issue where you go down to the end of the session and, you know, they do more than one. And so.
That'd almost be unfortunate.
I agree. I don't think it is.
A caucus that gets duly elected deserves to move a priority through,
sure.
even over the minority. But, you know, you start PQing everything, that's a slippery slope.
It is, and I hope that we're not there. But here's the problem that you have. You got a lot of new legislators that have not been in the Senate before, a lot that haven't actually been elected to the House before, so they don't have those understandings of how big of a nuclear option that actually is and what that would do to the Senate.
That chamber places some thoughtfulness and some statesmanship in people. Lou Hamilton, I thought of you Tuesday night. I saw a guy that I first met with you, now Senator Brian Williams, holding the floor very well. It was the first time to filibuster for several of the new senators. Interesting thing, and it's always nice when people can find compromise.
Brian has really impressed me and a lot of people, but by his measured approach to things. He's spoken when he's had something to say and not just to say something. And I actually talked to him just by happenstance the day after that all-night session, and he said, "Boy, I'm wiped out." He said, "This is my first one of these." So I think he's doing a great job down there. And the PQ issue, I agree that how many times do you want to push that red button? And
Brian has a very bright future.
I think so.
I thought an interesting thing, Richard. I actually watched the full thing from probably after 10 o'clock till 6:30. Dave Schatz was in there, and he had to be tired at 4 in the morning. He never took his tie down, fresh as a daisy. Yeah. I thought he was sending the signal that we're here till this is over. And kudos to Caleb Brown and Dave Schatz. There was no PQ. There were some negotiations done. I thought it was the way the Senate should work.
I agree. They were clearly in it to win it.
You've served with Scott Sifton. He also was there till the end. Looked like he could have won another 5 hours. The guy's won some tough races. Maybe a guy that's talked about as somebody that could challenge Governor Parson in 2020.
Absolutely. I mean, Scott's got the wherewithal. Like you said, he's won some really tough races in a tough district against a pretty formidable challenger. Yeah. I mean, when he beat Senator Lemke, I mean, that was a monumental task.
Yeah, like that.
And I will say, I mean, his future's bright if he chooses to go down that road. He'll be a tough candidate.
Let's talk Title IX. That's an issue I think is right on the precipice that we'll be talking about in the legislature the next few weeks. Mary Elizabeth, there's a Title IX bill now that kind of breaks down. I don't think people really realize the large breadth of a Title IX case at a when you send your kid to a university, the laws that you live under, it's not the world that exists on a college campus.
And people don't expect that their kids' rights are going to be completely taken away when they are accused of something. You go through the process and somebody says anything at all about you, and now all of a sudden you're under this separate process. You've got a letter that gets sent to you that doesn't name your accuser. You're not allowed to talk to anybody about it. You have to respond and have a conversation with their investigator. You name people you want to say as witnesses, but you may not even really know the full breadth of what they're saying happened. And then you go into a hearing where they can take away your scholarships, they can take away even your admittance to the university. If you're a kid from a family, my mother was the first generation to go to college in my family. There's no way she could have navigated any of this kind of stuff. People expect you have a right to face your accuser, you have a right to some sort of due process.
And it shocks me as the father of a daughter that you would send to a public, hopefully will go to college. Why in the world would a college be trying a sexual assault case? I want the cops doing that.
That's right. And I have 5 sons. I have a daughter. We all want to make sure that justice is done, and the right place to do that is in the courts. And it's not just public universities, it's private universities as well. If you're on WashU's campus, maybe you're there on a full scholarship and you have everything taken away and you don't even get to cross-examine or know who your accuser is in certain circumstances. I just think that when you're arguing for due process, it's a hard place to start from to say, no, that's not something we want to apply.
Well, I think a lot of these laws were done with very good intentions, but sometimes it may be that maybe they've overstepped a little bit.
I've got my youngest son is a junior at the University of Miami, and we've talked about these kind of issues, and he belongs to a fraternity that is a bunch of real responsible boys, and they've got a very strong internal disciplinary policy at the fraternity as well as the university in terms of how you deal with problem children, if you will. I find myself on a rare occasion agreeing with a Republican on the due process issue. I think no matter what the circumstance, you got to protect the health and safety of the person that alleges being attacked, as well as the person who is alleged to be the attacker. And I think that's the court of law to do it. And you know, there's got to be a process that protects everyone. But I'm not sure how you do that.
Richard, you've been active working on this. Break down what the proposals in the legislature currently would do.
It essentially takes the rights that we have in the U.S. Constitution and the U.S. Bill of Rights, and it puts it into Missouri statute. That's, in essence, really what it does. That we're not plowing any new constitutional ground, not creating any new constructs. We're simply taking those principles that every American would expect to have if they're accused of something as serious as a sexual assault, and knowing that we have these processes in place so that you can get to the truth. That's what we're after.
Hamilton, with a minute left, who won the week?
I'm going to say, this will surprise you, Vince Hummel, the retired ex-mayor of St. Louis who jumped back into the political fray, sure, endorsing a bunch of candidates in the local elections and took people by surprise. We'll see how effective it is, but it was interesting to see him rise from the ashes and get back involved in politics.
Senator Hummel, who won the week?
I'm going to say Senate Democrats. We got 11 weeks left of session. Only one priority bill has passed, and it really didn't do what everyone wanted it to do.
I think Senate Democrats have got to spend most of the session eating popcorn, watching Republicans filibuster Republicans.
Sometimes that works out well.
Who won the week?
So I'm going to say Representative Nick Schroer. He had a huge week,
yes,
leading and carrying this giant abortion bill, but also passing a bill that adds fentanyl to our books to protect kids, to protect our communities on really a variety of issues.
You know, Republicans passed a tort reform to protect people in Hartford, Connecticut this week, and probably other folks too. But there's also a protection for people in Hartville, Missouri. You could end the legal notice racket. And I think Nick has a way to actually save regular people money. That Geico Lizard seems like a nice chap, but what about somebody in Greenville, Missouri? Who won the week?
Elijah.
I think so too. He's fulfilling the potential people thought of him early on.
Yes, he is.
I'm going to say Kathy Swan. Obviously in the Senate we saw the fast track bill of the governor's educating adults, actually building workforce development, not easy to pass. Got it through the House this week. I thought very good work by her. And we will see you next week on This Week in Missouri Politics.
This Week in Missouri Politics, sponsored by the Missouri Association of Career Fire Protection Districts, Spire, and Sterling Bank.